All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, Introduction to Sports Psychology. We have the amazing Carrie Jackson joining us today. I'm not going to go into a deep discussion of her background and stuff like that because I've asked her to do that. I'm here just to say hello, just to kick things off. Actually, I'm only here to push the record button. That's like I have one job and I
It's an
can't get it
important
wrong,
job.
Carrie. I'll be in trouble. So I'm going to go to mute and disappear, and I'm going to let Carrie take over.
All right. Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you. So, for those of you who don't know who I am or the work that I do, my name is Carrie Jackson, and I'm a mental skills coach. I'm a certified mental performance consultant, and I have been in the field of sports psychology for 20 plus years and have the unbelievable, wonderful, incredible privilege of working with athletes and exercisers all on the mental and emotional aspects that come into play when we're talking about training and competition. And I work with all different athletes, all different levels, from recreational, competitive athletes to elite and professional athletes competing at international and national and international levels, and all different sports. But I have a very special place in my heart for my endurance athletes. So I do specialize in working with endurance athletes and love my endurance athletes. And I also specialize in working with injured athletes. So some of you might know I have a podcast that I co-host with my beautiful, wonderful, amazing co-host, Cindy Kuzma, who's also my co-author of the book Rebound, which is for injured athletes. And the podcast is Injured Athletes Club. It's the club you didn't want to be a part of, but but you might be at some point, right? When you're an athlete. So I'm a two-time author. Actually, my first book was On Top of Your Game, which has all kinds of incredible mental training skills for athletes. And so I love what I do. So just like you guys have your physical coaches here with BaseCamp, and you have your, maybe your strength and conditioning coaches, I get to come in and be the mental coach, right? And coach people on everything that happens but between the ears, right? All of those factors that absolutely have an impact on our performance. So, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. So our topic today is mastering your mindset with self-talk strategies. So I heard that you guys have a very big challenge coming up. And so I wanted to give you guys some immediate strategies that you can sink your teeth into and be able to implement right away. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background, because I will tell you, in all of these years with, I've probably worked with thousands of athletes at this point, between all of the presentations and my individual athletes, that almost a majority of the athletes are coming to me for two different reasons. One is like, I'm feeling completely debilitated by pressure and performance anxiety. And on the flip side of that is, how do I feel more confident? I want to feel more confident and have more belief in myself. So those are two, and I get a lot of other things too, right? But those are two really significant ones that people are come in wanting to know. So I would love, here's first chat box challenge, the first chat box challenge. What does this quote mean to you? So I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but tell me in the chat box, because some of you have probably heard this quote before, right? This famous Henry Ford quote, which is, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right, right? So when you hear this quote personally, because people have different thoughts about the quote, right? So in the chat box, go ahead and put, like, what does this quote mean to you when you hear this quote? Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So as you guys put that in the chat box for the chat box challenge, one of the things I want to talk about before I get into the actual, like, how do I do this, Carrie? What are the techniques you can give me that can help me with this, boosting confidence and reframing and self-belief, is why we are challenged with negative thoughts, and why this is why it's hard sometimes to do this, to have self-belief and to have self-confidence. And there's a reason, and a lot of that reason has to do with the way our brain processes information, and the fact that we are animals at our core, and that we are very much wired for survival. And because of that, there's a certain way that our brain operates that plays a very significant part in this. So let's see. We got a few answers here. So I am in charge of me. Nice. I love that.
Hey,
Yes.
Carrie, I don't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but
Go ahead.
Chat was stopped for a second.
Oh,
I
was it?
just opened
Okay.
it up, so now everyone can answer. So the answers are rolling in, but chat works now. There you go.
Perfect. Oh, nice. Look at that rolling in. Some of you were like, "Oh, I'm going straight to Q&A. There's no chat." I am in charge of me. That's so good. That's one of the quotes I like to say is like, you are the boss of your brain." Right? The brain is not the boss of you, but because of the way the brain's wired, oftentimes that is how it feels. Let's see. So we listen to ourselves and believe. When I think I can, I can. When I think I can't, I can't. Nice. Might as well think you can. I love that, B. That's so awesome. You can talk yourself into defeat 100%. We really determine our own destiny. We set our own limits and potential. Oh, these are great, great answers, you guys. So let's see. We had a couple in the Q&A too. So okay, but now we're in the chat. Awesome. So attitude affects outcome and what you're able to do. Yes, this is wonderful, you guys. So you really nailed it, right? Like that's kind of what, when he said this quote, that was what it was all about. It was like, okay, our thoughts play a role in our beliefs, right? And sometimes those thoughts that pop into our head, um, they are there are many different reasons why that initial thought pops in, and sometimes we don't have control of that initial thought. So sometimes the most important thing you can do is to stop listening to yourself and start talking to yourself, right? And that's exactly what Henry Ford is saying here. Like you can make the choice to think that you can or think that you can't. There's a lot of different things that inform that self-belief, but one of them sometimes is just automatic thought patterns, right? So with this idea, so I got another chat box challenge. Now that the chat box is open, I have another chat box challenge, and it has to do with what you see here right now on the screen. So there's two different things I want to sort of introduce here. So oftentimes we interchange these feelings or these concepts of self-belief and self-confidence, right? So, but they are different. They are very much connected, but they are different constructs. So self-confidence is the how you feel about your ability, right? So self-confidence is the belief that you can meet the demand in front of you and meet the task that's in front of you. So that's like your feelings of confidence have to do with your ability. Whereas your self belief has to do with how you feel about yourself, regardless of your accomplishments, right? So it has more to do with our feelings of worthiness and feelings about what we deserve and don't deserve, right? So when you think about those two different things, which one, so this is your chat box challenge. Which one do you think is more important when it comes to performance? Is it self-confidence or self-belief? Right? So which one has a bigger impact on performance outcomes when we're talking about that idea of like belief in my ability versus my worthiness, right? My belief in myself regardless of my accomplishments. So let's see. Ooh, and this though I like this. Belief. So we have belief, self-belief, easier said than done. Yes. Self-belief, self-confidence, self-belief for me, self-belief, self-confidence, definitely belief. Nice. This is great, right? And it might be different for different people, right? And some of us might oftentimes people that struggle with self-belief will will potentially struggle with self-confidence also, but not necessarily, right? Because sometimes self-confidence is very task specific, and as you know, you could be really confident. We also call that in research, we call it self-efficacy, which is like situation specific confidence. So you could feel really confident in your ability in one area of your life or one specific task in that area of your life and not have that same confidence in another. But self-belief is also very, very closely connected to that. So nice. So it's clearly a formula combo, as the slide suggests, right? So they are very much intertwined. So for each individual, there is going to be some uniqueness to which one is the one that I feel like I am struggling with right now, right? And which one is the one that I think needs a little TLC when we're talking about that. So that's also absolutely true. So what it comes down to with these two different constructs is that self-confidence is about having courage and self-belief is about having trust. So those are the two things that we're really wanting to, when we think about all these like sports psychology and mental skills training, oftentimes when people come to me and they're coming to me because they want to feel more confident, what they really need is to learn how to have more courage, right? Because you're not going to feel confident all the time. It's just not how it works. So sometimes instead of feeling confident, what you need is, I need 30 seconds of courage to take this leap, and then some of that confidence is going to come after I take that leap. And then the trust is, can I trust my own ability, right? That's where those two things are connected. Can I trust that I have the skills to be able to do what's in front of me, and that if I don't, I have the resources to be able to figure it out? So trust and courage are even more important than or they're like what holds self-belief and self-confidence underneath. Nice job with your challenge. So let's see. So where does knowing that I've done the work, so I'm ready, fall? Ah, yes. So now you're talking about, that's a great question. So you've done the work, you're ready to go. So that it really falls into both, right? And that's one of the things I talk about with my athletes, my one-on-one coaching clients a lot, is that preparation equals confidence. So that's what you're talking about. That, like, I know that I've done the work means also that you trust your training, right? So you're going into your event, you're not second guessing your training. Like, I've done everything I can up to this point. Nothing I do now is going to change my training. I trust my training. I've done the work. I'm ready to go, right? So that I'm doing the work, right? That preparation will help feed the feeling of confidence, because preparation equals confidence. Because preparation means, like, I've dotted all the I's, I've crossed the T's, I'm ready to do this. Yeah, great question. So another question I get a lot is like, well, okay, so is it the chicken or the egg when we're talking about this idea of confidence? And I'd like to feel more confident in myself, and I'd like to believe in my ability to do this thing in front of me, right? And we still use those terms interchangeably. Is it the chicken or the egg, right? So do I need to feel confident in order to have success? Or do I need to have success in order to feel confident? Right. So, and the answer is both, right? Right. It's both the chicken and the egg when it comes to confidence. Like, there are things we can do to help boost our feelings of confidence so that we set ourselves up for success. And when we have a performance accomplishment, that absolutely feeds our feelings of confidence, right? So it absolutely works in both directions. It is both the chicken and the egg, right? So I want to share a little statistic here with you. So with this idea, with the question of what percentage of your internal dialogue is positive versus negative. So right now, just think about yourself and think about this question, and think about all of the different thoughts that enter your mind in any given day. Maybe let's say all of the thoughts entering your mind during a challenge, right? Or a competition. You can even pick one of those scenarios too. And what percentage of those thoughts are actively positive versus neutral or negative, we'll say, right? Like, so if you had to break it down, and you don't need to, like, put numbers to it, but just like hold that in your mind as a concept as I talk about this, right? Of like, oh, okay, when I think about myself, what percentage of my thoughts in any given day or on performance day, on competition day, are positive versus negative in a proactive, positive way? So the numbers you see in front of you, the first one there is from a research study that was done in 2020. So in 2020, there was a team of psychologists from Queen's University in Canada that were able to establish a method for detecting when one thought ends and another thought begins, which is amazing that we now have the technology to be able to understand that. Because before that time, there were other ways they were trying to study, like, how many thoughts does a human have in a day? And we now know they weren't as effective now that we have this technology to be able to see this. It was actually thought that the number was much, much bigger. But what they found was 6,200, the first number that you see on your screen there. So they conducted a study and discovered that humans have an average of 6,200 thoughts every day. That's how many thoughts you have in a day. It's a lot of thoughts, a lot of opportunities, right? So if we time travel back 15 years before that, in 2005, there was another incredible study that was done. And this one was done by the National Science Foundation. And what they did was they summarized all of the research to that date in 2005, all of the research to date that was done on human thoughts. And in their summary, what they found was that 80% of your thoughts are negative, and 95% of your thoughts are simply a repetition of the thoughts you had the day before. What? Right? I was blown away when read this. Like, I know it's high. I know how the brain works, and I know why this is true. And I'll explain that to you in just a minute about the brain. But these are remarkable numbers. And what this helps you understand is negative thoughts are going to pop into your head, right? Even if you have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, you've done everything. You can go into an event and you're still going to have negative thoughts, right? That's normal, right? And the reason 95% of thoughts are repetition also has to do with the way our brain is wired, right? So our brain, because we are wired for survival, our brains are wired for speed over accuracy. So sometimes we create these automatic thought patterns in order to help make very quick decisions. So because we're wired for speed over accuracy, because sometimes we need to act fast in order for survival, right? The problem comes with athletic performance. Oftentimes, those automatic thought patterns are working against us, and those negative thoughts are working against us because our brain is interpreting something as a threat when it isn't really a threat. But that wiring in the brain, ooh, man, it is so incredibly adept at protecting us in with the possibility of a threat, and the brain isn't always determining the difference between a psychological threat and an actual threat to self, right? Your physiological self. But the impact on the body is the same, the impact on the brain is the same, and that's why we'll see some of these challenges that come up for athletes, right? So you have a negativity bias. That is why this is sometimes challenging, right? So your brain naturally has a negativity bias because it's wired to protect you. So literally our brain it's it's programmed, so to speak, right? It's wired to be able to scan the environment and detect harm, and detect something that might potentially be negative, and it is going to imprint that in our memory more deeply than anything else, right? So and because our brain's wired for speed over accuracy, it's very good at picking up on negative things. It's very good at looking at all the what ifs, all of the worst case scenarios. Like it's adept at that, especially. So it's already naturally wired that way. And then if we repeat that cycle and we continue down that path and we continue to feed that neural pathway, then it gets then you get a really strong neural pathway for that. So the reason I share all of this is to help you understand, like, all of this is normal. Like, if you're having negative thoughts, if you're feeling anxious, if you're not feeling confident, you're not believing in yourself, a lot of that is very normal and has to do with the way our brain works. The beautiful thing about that, though, is that our brain also has neuroplasticity, which means we can change it. It takes work, it takes effort. There's some work involved, just like your physical training, right? There's some mental training involved to do it, but you absolutely can work on it, and you absolutely can help to counter the natural negativity bias that we have in our that's wired in our brain for survival. This also comes up with my injured athletes. Sometimes that's a time where that's protective mechanism can kick into high gear. And even when you're physically cleared and your body is ready, the brain is still stuck in that protective mode. And so there's things that you need to do in order to um, sort of starve that neural pathway and feed a new neural pathway so that you can help your brain more quickly understand that I'm okay, I'm safe, and I'm ready to do this. I can do this. So all of this is to say that, and that first quote, right, that first Henry Ford quote, is that our thoughts have an impact on how we feel, right? And how we feel, a lot of that has to do with the self-belief, right? So our thoughts have an impact on how we feel, which has an impact on what we do. And then what we do and the outcome of that feeds right back into what we think and what we believe is possible and not possible and what our expectations are. So this is the cycle, right? And there's all different interventions with mental training that you can throw into each one of these, right? So we're going to talk about reframing. We're going to talk about the thought processes and some of the tools that you can use to throw the wrench in there, right? But really, there's different spots where you can throw a wrench in each one of these things. But yes, it's the circle of life. Nice. So that's I'm gonna give you some tools for the thought part. So so language matters. The words that we use matter. And sometimes the most important thing you can do, like I had mentioned, is to stop talking to yourself, stop listening to yourself and start talking to yourself, right? So sometimes we need to come in a proactive way with reframing, knowing that I don't always have to buy into that first thought that pops into my head, right? That sometimes what we need to do is challenge that thought. So in my first book, I talk about this. I might talk about it in Rebound too. I should know that. But this idea that we have a little monster on one shoulder and a little athlete on the other, and whichever one you feed is the one that will get stronger. Because when you feed it, what's happening is you're literally building a neural pathway in your mind, right? So and sometimes those neural pathways can create automatic thought patterns that come so quick because of how our brain works. It comes so quick that the thought is there before you even consciously decide whether or not you can handle the situation in front of you, right? So an example of this might be like if you're triathlete or a cyclist and you're approaching a climb. Let's say it's a race you've done before. You're doing a stage race, and it's one of the climbing stages, and there's a big climb coming, and it's coming, and you're already dreading it, right? And so the thought before you're even near the climb, you have a thought in your head about the climb, and that thought, depending on what that thought is going to impact how you feel, right? So if the thought is like, oh God, I hate that climb, then you're filled with dread. And then what does that do to your behavior, right? What does that do when you actually get to the climb and now you're feeling it in your legs and you're headed up the climb and all you want to do is throw your bike off the mountain, right? But if we reframe and we have a different thought, can we change that cycle? Does the feeling change and does the behavior change, right? So this is I remember I had one cyclist in particular. I love the story. I've told it a million times. But she is, pro cyclist. Wasn't a climber. She was a phenomenal sprinter, but she wasn't a climber, and she hated climbs with a passion. But it was, it's part of the race. It's part of the package. So we talked about all of this and kind of like teased all this out, and like this, it's not a matter of if you're going to do another climb, it's when. Like, this is part of it's part of racing. So how do we approach this differently? Because she totally had this, which she hit, and especially when she would get passed on the climb, it just filled with rage, and she would be so upset, and then she would start to feel defeated and slow down, right? That's the behavior piece. So we started to shift her language that she was using. And instead of every time the climb came, any climb, she was just filled with dread and I hate this climb and I can't wait till this is over. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this climb. I wish the entire race was climbing and I can't wait to get there. And we just flipped it, and we did it in a playful, fun way, which in almost in an absurd way, because she hated it so much that we were going to like really instill some levity and laughter in it. And changed everything for her, right? So sometimes you have to figure out, what is it for me that's going to be the game changer? What is the language I need to use? What is the reframe I need to employ in order to do this? So you can see all these different frames on the screen in front of you, right? So if you imagine, like, if you take a snapshot, to do a little experiment here, take a snapshot of like a moment where you had one of your best races ever or one of your best workouts ever, and you just felt incredible, and maybe you were really tired at the end and you worked really hard, and somebody captured this beautiful picture of you in that moment that just really captured exactly how you felt in that moment. And then you take that picture and you put a wooden frame around it that's all cracked and peeling, right? That frame tells a story, right, of that image. Now, if you take that now it's on canvas and it's in the Louvre, right? It's in a famous art museum and it's up on the wall and people are looking at it as a work of art. That frame, right? That canvas, that tells a story, right? So when we talk about this idea of reframing, that's what we're talking about. We're putting this in a different frame to see if we can change the narrative, to see if we can change the story around this, so that, and that's the thought intervention, so that I feel differently about this and I will do something different, right? So that's the cycle that we're talking about, and that idea of reframing. Similar to, like, think of your favorite movie scene and the score that they have behind the scene. If you changed it to a different song, totally different vibe, right? Like, you could have a completely different, you could take a romance scene and turn it into a terrifying, horror movie scene just by changing the music, right? So that's a reframe, right? We're changing the story with the frame. So I'm going to give you now a couple different tools that you can use to play with some of this idea of reframing. And I'll get to B. I see your question there is lying to yourself in order to reframe. Does that actually work? It's a great question. So I'll get back to that. So the first reframe tool is called flipping the script. So flipping the script means oftentimes people will think about things that they don't want versus things that they do want. And it's a subtle but very important shift in mindset and in language, and I'll explain why. So flipping the script is like, here, I'll give you an example. So right now, don't think about a shark. Think about anything else but a shark. Just don't think about a shark. Okay, so put in the chat box whether, how many of you thought of a shark? Put yes or no if you thought about a shark. Let's let's test this theory out of a little bit. So we got a few yes. Shark! Nice. I used to have a shark image. I should have put that there. Right? Yeah, of course, right? So your brain, it's not processing the word don't, right? It goes straight to the action. It goes, okay, great. Okay, don't think about a shark. Shit, I just thought about a shark, right? That's what happens. You can't not think about it. And because you have to think about, what is it that I'm not thinking about, right? So this is where thinking about what you want versus what you don't want has a very big impact in this circle, right? In the circle that we're talking about. So flipping your don'ts to do's, one way to actually do this, right? You could take a piece of paper, write on a piece of paper, just like draw a line right down the middle. So you have two columns, and the left column is your don'ts and the right column is your do's. And in the don't column, you start there first and just to exhaustion, like write down, what are all the things you don't want to have happen in an upcoming race, or what are all the things on your mind that you don't want, right? And you can pick specific areas in your life to do it. Like, these are all, you know they're all life skills in addition to performance skills, so you can apply this to other areas too. But so you're writing down, well, what are some, when I think about some of my fears, right? And some of the negative thoughts that I've had, what are some of the don'ts, right? What are the ways I'm feeding the monster? And what are those don't thoughts? And you write that down on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, with each one, you counter it with like, oh, okay, so if that's what I don't want, what do I want? And some of you are like, okay, that seems really simple. Like, okay, well, I could do that. Some people really struggle with this. Like, it seems so simple and so easy, and then they get pen to paper and they start doing it and find like, oh, wow, this is a little bit harder than I thought, right? And it takes some time. So you have to give yourself time and space to do this. If you do find that you're struggling with it, like, sit with it, stay with it, it will come, but it might take a little bit. Especially if you're someone that thinks in don'ts more than do's. And so the reason this is so important is that the don'ts, when you think about what you don't want, that is motivation that is grounded in fear, right? So with motivation, we're wanting to move towards something or away from something. So motivation that is grounded in fear is moving away from something. And those are don't thoughts. Do thoughts, that is motivation that is grounded in desire, right? That is motivation that is moving towards something. So if you are someone that struggles with moving towards, this might be challenging, and it is also very good for you to do. Like, I really, really encourage you to do this. So but that's why this is so important. This idea of flipping the script and thinking about like, okay, I got to think about what I want versus what I don't want. I got to flip the don'ts to do's because I need my motivation to be grounded in desire and grounded in moving towards versus grounding in fear and grounded in moving away from. So I will say that motivation can work, but what we find in the research is that oftentimes it is not sustainable, and you're more likely to have there's higher incidence of burnout and quitting your sport when the motivation that's always grounded in that, in the fear and the moving away from, right? So giving yourself permission to move towards. For I'd say anyone that said like the self-belief is the thing that you struggle with, maybe even more than self-confidence, sometimes this might be something that's challenging. And I really, really encourage you to do that. So that's the first one, thinking about the don't think about a shark, right? Like think about what you do want versus what you don't want. So that's your first mental training drill, is flipping the script. The next one is put me in, coach. I love this one. So this is fascinating. This one also came from some really, really interesting research on what we call psychological distancing. So put me in, coach. Basically, super simple. The idea with this is that when you're talking to yourself, right, when you're thinking about the thoughts that are coming into your mind and coaching yourself, let's say you're out doing the challenge that you have coming up, or maybe you're it's intervals, this day, or you're sprinting and you're at the end of a crit, and this is it, like everything that you have right now in this moment, right? So when you're having to push yourself to that potential and you're coaching yourself through that moment, right, with your thoughts, what you want to do is, instead of using the first person, which like, I've got this, I can do this, you're using third person language and also using your name, right? So like, you've got this, Carrie. I believe in you. I know you can do this. You're on top of this, right? You're using that third, almost as if there is a coach that is talking to you, right? So the way our brain processes that information is different when we talk to ourselves in first person versus third person, right? So it's so great because as for as amazing, our brains are just incredible. And they're just as amazing as they are stupid, which is going to sound funny, but like, it doesn't discern the difference. It takes it in as if someone else is talking to you. It's amazing. So really playing with that for yourself. And I'll even like, if you're someone that does, writes out affirmations, like if you write out, which I'm a big fan of, like before competition or before a big workout, like writing out your affirmations, which are your powerful positive statements stated as if they're already true, right? Like, so you have your like 5 or 6 affirmations you're going to read before you go out and do your time trial or whatever. So I'll have my athletes play with both and do one in first person, write it out, and do another in third, and see which one resonates more, like which one gives you a visceral feeling when you read it. And that's what you want to do. So because um, one of the reasons this has such an impact is because it creates psychological distancing. So what I mean by that is, when you're in a situation and it's very internal, it's very intimate, and it's happening to you, right? Like, so let's say the climber that's on the climb and hates climbing and is filled with dread and it's feeling the pain in your legs, and you just want it to be over and you just want it to be done, and you're starting to question your entire career in cycling, right? So when you're talking to yourself in the first person, it's very like internal, personal process. So if I ask that athlete then to start, maybe reframing in some way and saying like, I've got this, I can do this, the monster voice has a tendency to come in and say, but do you? Because I don't think you do. I think, so we don't believe it. Right. So that idea of lying to yourself that we were going to kind of come back to, right? Like sometimes when you use that first person, we automatically counter it. But when you use third, it creates distance, right? It creates distance from the experience in a way where you're going to take that in a little bit different way, that language. So it's a little different than lying to yourself, but so I'm going to touch on that in just a second. But playing with this idea of talking to yourself in the third person and using your name, because now we're receptive, right? We're listening um, to a different voice that creates that. We're listening to, that's how we feed the athlete. And that's how sometimes we believe the thought that comes in because it feels like it's coming from someone else, even though it's not, right? Because we change the language. That's how powerful language is. That's why language matters, because our brain takes it in that way. It takes it in just as language. So play, I really encourage you to play with this, like, and see how it feels. And with the research, one of the, as it creates the psychological distance, one of the things that's been so fascinating is they're when they study the brain, having people try this language versus first person, what they find is in the brain, there's less activation in the part of your brain that's associated with rumination, right? Which is like getting stuck in a negative feedback loop or worry, like that kind of rumination. So when we use that third person, there's less of that happening, less activation there. And they also find that people are better able to perform under stress when they're using third person versus first person. So I encourage you to play with that. It's kind of fun to play with. So with the lying, it so part of that is right where that sort of idea came from is the whole idea of fake it till you make it. So if I tell myself something enough, and will I start to believe it? And part of that also came from the idea of learned helplessness, which is when I when I receive a message about my ability and I hear it enough, I'm going to start believing it, even if it's not true, right? That idea. So this is kind of flipping that. So there is a place for fake it till you'll make it. But it I do find with my athletes sometimes when they use that, the other voice comes in that's like, I know that's not true. I know you're lying, right? So that's why I wanted to bring it up during this idea of the third person, where you can kind of play with it a little bit differently versus for some, fake it till you make it does, like if I tell myself that enough, I'll start to believe it. But that does not work for everybody. Is what I found. So let's see. So Mark asks, what if you embrace the pain, the discomfort? Um, okay, yeah, man. So I could do a whole webinar. I could do a whole course just on sort of psychology of suffering and that topic, because now once you bring pain into the equation, especially when you're at max effort, there's certain techniques that work and better than others, I'll say. And one is we do know, like, if you expect the pain going in, we find that sometimes the RPE, like rate of perceived exertion, is less than if you don't, right? But embracing the pain as part of it, and also reinterpreting the meaning of pain, um, that is something. And I know some of you are going to be like, this is crazy. Like, could you actually embrace pain and like look forward to pain? And some of you are thinking like, I can't do that. And some of you are thinking, yeah, I love that. Right. So everyone's different with this one. And that really is its own topic, that like, how do we work with pain and messages around pain and like what's happening in the body? Because it's very much a psychological and physiological process. So I'm gonna keep going because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So we might dive into that a little bit more. So that has put me in, coach. The last one I want to give you, this is to really help understand that where you choose to focus has an impact on how you feel. So this is actually, it's a wrench both in the thought process as well as the feeling, right? So what you do with this is a template that it's like a fill in the blank, right? Template that you memorize and can help you shift how you're feeling in any given moment. So the way this works is if you find yourself hooked, right? And you find yourself frustrated, you find yourself angry, you find yourself annoyed, you find yourself scared, sad, nervous, whatever it is. So you're hooked, right? That emotion has you hooked. And in that moment, you say, okay, you pause, you take a breath, right? Because sometimes we have to downregulate the physiology before we can use a cognitive tool, right? So you got to take a breath, get grounded, and say, okay, hit the pause button. I am feeling frustrated. I am feeling annoyed, whatever it is. I am feeling scared. I am feeling anxious, right? I am feeling blank because I am focused on blank, right? So it's like I am feeling nervous because I am focused on whatever that is. I'm focused on whether or not I'm going to hit my PR. I am feeling dejected because I'm focused on somebody else's numbers and they hit, higher numbers than me because I'm looking at Strava too much. Right. So, but I am feeling blank because I am focused on blank. Right. So you really have to kind of slow yourself down, hit the pause button so you can implement this. Then I want to feel. So this helps you identify, how do I ideally want to feel in this moment? Right. So that you start to recognize uh, I don't have to be hijacked by my emotions. I don't have to buy into this emotion. I can decide to feel another way, right? Which is it takes practice. And when you're really hijacked, it's hard to do, which is why this takes practice, right? So mental training is just like physical training. If you want to get better at it, you have to practice, right? You don't get to do this once and you're magically like, I'm going to be confident for the rest of my athletic career. It's not how it works. So it's just like physical training, the mental training. You have to put the work in. So I want to feel blank, so I will focus on blank, right? So it helps your brain shift your focus so you shift the feeling, right? So that's your template for that. So you can take, I'll leave it for another second. You can take a screenshot. So you have the template. That is your template for I am feeling blank because I am focused on blank. Right. So you identify, oh, the reason I'm feeling this way and the reason these thoughts are going through my mind is because I am choosing to focus here. I want to feel whatever ideal emotion you want to feel. So I am choosing to focus on blank, right? You have more choice. You are the boss of your brain and you have more choice over that than you realize. You don't have control over the initial thoughts that come in because of everything I explained earlier, but you do have a choice of how to respond. You do have a choice to reframe. You do have a choice of whether or not you implement your mental training drills that we talked and practice those. So the other thing I kind of like want to impart before we jump into the Q&A is just that, through my 20 plus years of doing this work, one of the things I have come to realize is that there's two things. Like when it comes to confidence, there's two specific things, like epiphanies I've sort of had about this. And one is that confidence is a skill. We don't always think about it as a skill, but confidence is absolutely a skill. And confidence isn't something you are, it is something you do. Right. So if you want to feel confident, right, and oftentimes that's how we talk about it. It's like a feeling that we're wanting. If you want to feel confident, you have to do something to that end. But sometimes what we're seeking, we're chasing the wrong feeling, right? Because sometimes what you want to feel is courage, which doesn't always feel awesome. It doesn't always feel amazing, right? It's sometimes terrifying, that 30 seconds of courage, right? So sometimes you need to ask yourself, am I chasing the wrong feeling? But the first epiphany is confidence is a skill. And the second epiphany is confidence is nothing without resilience. That is, I feel like the number one mental training drill to work on is what are the tools that I can work on that help with me being able to bounce back? Because oftentimes that is the difference between your PR that day or not. That is the difference between someone who gets on the podium and someone who doesn't, is the resilience. It's not, especially when you get to a certain level, everyone comes to the table with the same physical ability. It's who is able to deal with the setbacks that happen more quickly and more effectively, right? Who's able to navigate the challenges that come on race day and make the adjustment versus fighting against it, right? And accepting that this is what's happening now. What do I do? Right? That has everything to do with resilience. And absolutely, confidence and self belief are connected to that. But I think sometimes we just need to ask ourselves, am I chasing the right thing? Right? Do I need, I keep chasing confidence, but is there something else I should be chasing? So these are just quick wrap up thoughts. which is it's absolutely normal to have negative thoughts, right? So don't beat yourself up. And negative thoughts aren't bad, right? They're thoughts, right? They're thoughts that are popping into our mind, and they pop in there for a reason. And sometimes they pop in for no reason other than your brain is wired for speed over accuracy, right? So they're not bad, they're just thoughts. So don't beat yourself up, don't fight against them, just look at it and reframe it, right? So you don't have to believe every thought that comes into your mind because of those numbers that I showed you, right? Because a lot of those thoughts are just going to pop in, but that doesn't mean that you have to listen to them, right? So, and then you have to stack the deck. What I mean by that is because we have a negativity bias, because our brain is wired to scan the world for worst case scenarios, you need to be proactive with tipping the balance, right? You have to come in and stack the deck with your mental training, with some of these tools to be able to be proactive about balancing that out. So now we're gonna switch to some Q&A. I think Tim's gonna help us out here with some. We'll jump into the Q&A section of our webinar today. And this is just if you want to check out more about what I do, and you can find me on social media at Feed the Athlete, right? Feed the Monster, Feed the Athlete. So on Insta and X, I'm at Feed the Athlete. Facebook, I'm at Mental Skills Training for Athletes. And then I have all kinds of resources on my website. And if you sign up for my email list, I have all kinds of fun stuff coming out this year, actually, with my email list. And then I also have a separate email list and support for injured athletes over at injuredathletesclub.com.
Awesome presentation. Thank you so much for sharing that. How would you like people to submit questions? Should they stay in chat, or do you want them in Q&A? I think we should just pick one for however the
Yeah,
questions are.
let's do Q&A for our questions. We'll do
All
it
right.
that way. That sounds great.
I'm going to send you one in chat because I just realized
Ooh.
I actually, as one of the hosts, I can't
Oh,
post
you
in
can't.
Q&A, but somebody sent me one.
Okay,
So I'm going to
perfect.
start it out. It's a longer question.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, but I had to cut it and paste it
Not
real
at all.
quick.
All right, so question. During intense workouts, I find my mind going to current situations in life that make me upset. Ooh. I get angry and it actually drives me to perform better. Okay, yes. For instance, there are two local female cyclists that have commented on how much I'm cycling and that what I'm doing isn't within my abilities. Wah, wah. Whatever. Sorry. So,
Rub some dirt on it, kid.
yeah, that's right. People are lame. Okay, so they have commented to others about this and won't talk to me on group rides, etc. I'm so sorry this is happening. I feel it's not the most healthy way of thinking, even if it is helping me perform. This is a great question. I get this a lot, actually. How should I cope with this way of thinking? This is such a great question. So here's the thing with anger and using anger as fuel. It can be really effective. The challenge is that it's not always something that is within our control in that way. So we don't want it to necessarily be the only way that we do it. But so this is something that comes up with like like when you work with MMA fighters, like they're very much sometimes using scenarios that will bring up feelings of anger, and that helps with getting them into the optimal physiological state that they need in order to perform. The challenge is that sometimes that using that anger then can bleed into other areas of life, and it's not always healthy. So you're right, you're spot on in sort of asking yourself this question, like, is it okay to do this? Should I not do this? So I would say you can do it and it is effective, but it is not the only tool you want to have in your toolbox, right? And then especially if it's starting to feel icky, you know what I mean? Like, oh God, am I buying into this whole sort of dynamic that I don't really want to be a part of? Then you might go to something else, right? And oftentimes, I know this is challenging, but oftentimes, like when somebody else is talking, when we have haters and someone's talking shit, it has nothing to do with you. I know it doesn't
Right.
feel that way, but very often it has to do with what's happening for that person and their own insecurities and their own challenges and things that they wish they could do, and their own ways that they're feeding the monster, right? So often that doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean that they should be doing that, but oftentimes that is what's happening, and it has nothing to do with you. And so sometimes then you have to ask yourself, like, if these are people that I want in my life, is it time to have a conversation? Or if it's like, these are not people in my inner circle or even my second circle, they're maybe in the third circle. What they think about me is none of my business, and I don't need to put any energy into that. What I need to do is focus on what are my goals and what are my values and what is meaningful to me in my life. That's right. We kind of come back to that idea of I'm moving towards something or moving away from something. So that's kind of what you're speaking to. Such a great question is sometimes when we're using anger in that way, especially when it's connected to certain people, is that motivation that's grounded in what we want it to be, and does it make more sense to make a shift to motivation that's grounded more in moving towards something and desire? Yeah, great question. All right, let's see, what other questions do we have? Oh, let me jump into,
Yeah, you just had one coming Q&A.
oh, there we go. I've got it now. Okay. I was in the answer. There we go. Okay. So Kristen asks, how many repetitions of a positive thought does it take to alter the neural pathway? I wish I had an actual number. I wonder if they've done that. So I have not seen that research, but here's what I will tell you. When you build up a really strong neural pathway of, like, it's almost like we've created a formula in your mind, right? When if A then B, right? And so what we're trying to do is to go, what, but really, is that really if A then B? What if A then 13, right? Like, so what it's like the neural pathway that's very strong that's been developed is like it's like a freight train on a beautiful fresh track, and it moves very quick and very clean and very fast, right? Like, so when you're creating a new neural pathway, it's more like it's more like you're in the jungle and there is no trail and you have a machete and you're trying to break trail, right? But every time you repeat the thought, every time you, and I would say another powerful way to do this is writing it down, because that can help speed up the process. So every time you do that, every time you repeat that thought to yourself, you write that thought down, you're in a scenario where you think about what you do want instead of what you don't want. Each time you do that, the path gets clearer, right? To where, like, oh, now we have, like an overgrown hiking trail, and now we have a fire road, and now we have a paved road, right? It's kind of like that, like each time you do it. So I wish I could give you like um a set number. It does take time, but you can absolutely create a new neural pathway. Yeah. And I could say that not only from the work that I do with my athletes, but me personally, like I do these things also because I know that they work. And so it's hard work sometimes. And some of my athletes are like, oh my God, Carrie, I'd much rather do intervals. Like, please don't make me do this. It's work, but it's absolutely worth it. Um, yes, awesome question. So, oh, Sharon. Okay, Sharon says, I had a bad crash a few years ago during COVID, woke up bloodied and concussed, confused. It led to a lot of personal and relationship difficulties. Mm. Oh, I missed my partner's father's funeral. Okay, so now whenever I'm descending, I get panicky and full of self-doubt. Yes, I've worked with this a lot. Okay, it's gotten better over the years, but it's still there. I guess my question is, where does trauma type stuff feed into the reframing? Really, really great question. Um, so when there's trauma related, and this, especially with crashes and injury, like this comes up a lot. So when there's trauma that is part of the experience, um, there might be other work that needs to be done also. So sometimes, especially when we're talking about descending, right? So sometimes I've worked with clients that, like, they got injured on a descent, crashed, and now they're nervous as they descend, like not feeling as solid and confident when they descend as they were before. And part of that has to do with the brain has picked up on the body's vulnerability and it's trying to protect you. right? So it's making you uncomfortable so that you go, huh, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we shouldn't descend anymore. Let's figure where's the flat trail? Like where's the rail to trail? So when that happens, if you're eliciting your stress response, now we're talking about both the physiological response as well as the psychological response. So you might have to have tools that work on both, right? So instead of it just being about sort of reframing, you also need tools to downregulate the physiology, right? So really doing your breath work. One of the things that I work on with my cyclists is like the just repeating the mantra, relax your hands, relax your face, and breathe. And when you do that, sometimes we don't realize how much tension you're holding in your hands and in your face when you're descending. And it also has the reminder to breathe. Because if you're holding your breath, that elicits your stress response, right? And so when we're tense on the bike and we're stressed on the bike, what happens is you're not able to absorb. We lose our peripheral vision. We lose balance. We aren't able to absorb bumps in the road, so the physiology is feeding into you feeling more nervous, right? So sometimes even with my elite professional cyclists, if they've had a crash and they're coming back and they're struggling with this in particular, I will have them go take a downhill clinic, like, or do a bike handling or bike skills clinic, and come and really just come back to the basics of the skill of descending, right? So it's when I was a professor in sports psychology for graduate students, I would tell them it's not always mental, right? We have a tendency to have a filter of like, oh, I can fix this. Like it's always it's usually it's both, but it's not always mental. Sometimes I need to work on that physical piece. So hopefully that helps a little bit with that one. It's a really, really great question. So let's see. Next question. A challenge for me in races is to give myself permission to go hard. Yes, I tend to do really well when I do. Okay. But the challenge is that often cycling as an endurance sport has an economy component. Yes, it pays to conserve. Oh, I've so many athletes struggle with this. So the default is to find ways to save rather than spend, right? It's easier and comforting to just do that and finish in the pack. Yep. Any tips on how to prepare, how to recognize when to go all in, spend, and believe we can deliver? Yeah, absolutely. So I can't tell you how many athletes end up at the end of their careers never really knowing how hard they could push because of this fear that holds them back, right? So the fear is like, am I going to burn all my matches and end up, and end up not being able to finish the race, right? Am I going to spend them all and a lot of times what happens is you get to the finish and you're like, oh God, I have more in the tank, right? So you never give yourself the opportunity to know how big your tank is when that happens, right? So with some of my athletes will play with like, and you're working with your coach on this to make sure that this, to really think about the timing of this and how it fits into your overall plan for the season and your training plan. But one of the things we'll do is to figure out, well, what are my A, B, and C races? And one of those B or C races, what's one of those races where I can find that line, right? Where I can figure out where it doesn't matter what the outcome is. So you really have to like put your athlete ego in check when you do this, right? Because the athlete ego, and when I say athlete ego, that's not a bad thing, right? It's there for a reason, but sometimes it gets in the way, right? So you really have to put your athlete ego in check and go, the purpose for this race is to this end because it's part of a bigger picture of really figuring out what is the actual line, right? Because if you don't hit it, you don't know where it is and you never will. So giving yourself permission to fail is part of it. For some of us, that's the struggle, is that like, but I don't, yeah, it's envisioning it in a different way. Because I think sometimes the narrative there is like, man, I train really hard, I work really hard, I want to get to the race and I want to do my best and enjoy it. But then with that holding back, we never really let ourselves know what that best is until we allow ourselves to push through it. So that's one of the things that you can do is, and then there's other things that like, which we would have to do a different webinar, like really specific things to focus on and think mental training drills you can do to be able to push, right? So when you hit like peak effort, like how do I push through instead of back off? Because the brain's going to want you to back off, right? Because the brain is wired to protect you. So you're right about that. Like, your body's really, in addition to endurance sport being this, there's an economy component. Your brain does that too, and is trying to, and part of that has to do with the language that you're using and the thoughts that you have. Your brain is trying to figure out, do we have the resources for this? And sometimes, even if you physically do, because a thought has entered your brain that you don't, your body will back off. It's amazing. It's really amazing. So once you kind of know, like, oh my God, okay, this is how the brain and body operate. What's my hack? Right? What's the I need an override button. And there are override buttons. It just takes some time to do that. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I know I'm going to go a little bit over, so if anyone needs to leave, please feel
You're
free.
doing
But I want
great.
to.
Don't
Okay.
worry about it. You have two more questions.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. So, I had a bad accident last spring in a crit. It makes me want to not race crits anymore. Yeah. Should I force myself to do a few to resist avoidance? This is a great question. No. So the only reason I say that is for me, working with injured athletes and that being one of the places that I specialize in, if this is something that you want and you're passionate about and you want to get back to crits, you absolutely can. But I don't recommend forcing yourself to do it in order to, like, using that as the tactic to overcome the resistance and avoiding it. There might be other things you want to do first. And the reason I say that is because if you elicit your stress response, like let's say you go into a crit, and what happens when especially if you're, what happens with the brain when you've had a crash or when you've had an injury? Sometimes, let's say now you're in a crit, your brain, and you're not even conscious of this, your brain picks up on things in the environment that were similar to what were in play when you crashed. It triggers your stress response. Now you're tense on the bike. And when that happens, there's a physiological response that sets you up to be more likely to potentially get injured, right? So that's what we want to avoid. We just want to build up some other skills first before, right? That idea of like, I just get back up on the horse. So this is a don't just put dirt on it situation, Tim. Like this might be.
I didn't say it. I should have
No,
said it
I know.
earlier. Either it's not what I meant, but I couldn't agree more.
Right?
Excellent
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah. So it's a great, great question, Natalie. But so I want you, like, it's okay. I want you to have the belief that yes, if that is what you want to do, you can do it. There just might be some other tools you need to do first, so that you want to feel ready for it versus like, I'm terrified and maybe I should just force myself to do it. So if that's the situation you're in, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Yeah, really, really great question. Let's see. Okay, so one more so Andrew says, let's see, any thoughts on how to handle increased stress levels and irritability? Oh, yes, that may happen during fatigue and dealing with a high training volume. That is a really great question. And it's really real. So like, I think sometimes there's other people in our life that don't realize that that's what's happening, right? Like family or spouses or kids, like people that maybe aren't necessarily endurance athletes, and you're in that phase of your training and you just are and sometimes that happens because you're physically depleted. And what's interesting about this is that sometimes those emotions that we feel, it's actually your brain trying to get you to do something, meaning you're under recovered, under fueled, under hydrated. And we don't always realize that actually what your body is trying to do is it's trying to get you to do something. But then other times you're just depleted, and that's just where you're at in your training cycle, and you are, tired and irritable, right? When you're fatigued, things that would normally not feel like a stressor might feel like a stressor, right? Or might feel like I can't handle this because I just put everything out. So with that, I would say it's just really important to pay attention to. I was just talking to one of my athletes about this. The whole thought process has shifted with this, in the research around the idea of overtraining, and that it's not overtraining, it's under recovery. So if you're finding that you're like, man, my stress is super high and my irritability is super high, that is the first place I would go, is like, what's my stress recovery balance? And are there some things I need to do in order to fuel some of that recovery side, right? Like, and there's all different things that it could be like, am I getting sleep? Am I fueled? Am I hydrated? Do I need to get body work? Do I need to go hang out with one of my favorite people? And just, do I need to do something that's just for pure pleasure? Like, am I filling my cup? Am I, really paying attention to the recovery side of that balance, which, man, it's so huge for performance, and something that I see a lot of athletes struggle with, of like feeling like um feeling like rest days are is a waste of time, when like that could not be further from the truth. So just paying attention to that, I would say, is an important piece in there. Great questions, you guys.
Excellent, excellent answers. I am going to say about the rub some dirt on it just to make sure, because
No,
this is
do
going to
it.
be
Yeah,
recorded.
we should
We were
explain.
joking, everybody, before the webinar started. This area, for me as a coach and a professional coach, it's like I've worked with a lot of sports psychologists and great ones like Carrie, and it's like, um, to be honest with you, my experience at the pro level, it's got to be two different roles. Because what I was joking about is like my
Right.
wiring as a dad and as granddad is rub some dirt on a kid, like, and just push them out there and let's go back again. But it's not the right answer to high performance, right? So it
Yeah.
really is important. So I was joking when I said that to her, and so I should have kept my mouth shut in that whole way.
So
But
good.
that was the joke, because
Sometimes
that's
it's the right answer,
yeah.
right? Like, I will say with some of my athletes that I love and adore. And when we get to this wonderful, special part of our relationship where I can say, you're just being a baby, suck it up. You can do this. Like, and they're like, okay, you're right. Right. So it's all about timing and knowing like when to say what. Yeah. So sometimes rubbing dirt on it is exactly what they need to hear.
And that and as the and that's why it's great to have two different places, a coach and a sports psychology research. They should work together, but
Yes.
they don't have the same process goals. They might have the
Right.
same end goal, share the
Yes.
same value, but we need to take two different pathways working together to get
Yeah.
the athlete there. And if you try to walk that same pathway, it's problematic, particularly at the extremely high
Yes.
level.
100%.
One of the things
Yeah.
that Carrie said so great, and I answer this question as someone who does a lot of education myself 1,000 times. If I had two athletes at the world tour level, and one was a slightly better climber, and one was a slightly better this, and one pedaled at 95, and which one wins
Right.
the race? And I always answer the question exactly the same: the mentally toughest one.
Yep.
And they're like, no,
Mhm.
no, no, you don't understand my question. This person has a higher cadence. And I say, no, I understand your
I
question really well.
understand
I'm giving
completely.
you the answer. It's just not the answer you expect.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it is great. And Carrie is a wonderful resource. We'll post her connections, jump in, join her newsletter, look at the groups. Excellent service and resource if you want to up your game. We're going to hear from her again, throughout the rest of the program and stuff like that. So I just want to thank you for being on, being part of it. What great advice. I took a page full of notes myself,
Nice.
and we're going to be using some of your languaging between now and Sunday very aggressively as we prepare for our Alp to Zwift challenge on Saturday.
Yes, awesome. Yes, have a great challenge, you guys.
All right, Carrie, thank you very much. Thanks
My
everybody for
pleasure.
attending tonight.
Thanks,
Bye now.
everyone.